Hello and welcome to the webinar on dehulling ancient grains. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many upcoming and recorded webinars on organic farming and research topics on our website at extension.org/organic_production. Before we begin, I'd like to just give you a quick rundown on how today's webinar will work. The presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then after that, we'll have another 30 minutes for your questions. We'll be reading the questions out loud after the presentation is over, and we'll answer as many as we have time for. This is our third webinar with the members of a research team from the NIFA OREI project, Value-Added Grains for Local and Regional Food Systems, and we're delighted to have Frank Kutka and Elizabeth Dick back again, and also introduce Brian Baker and Nigel Tudor. Brian Baker grew up on a small farm in upstate New York, and he has a PhD in agricultural economics from Cornell University, and he's been working with organic farmers for over 30 years. Frank Kutka studied plant breeding with Margaret Smith at Cornell University and currently serves as a co-coordinator of the Farm Breeding Club, organized among members of the Northern Plains Sustainable Agricultural Society. Kutka lives and breeds maize and other crops in western North Dakota. Elizabeth Dick, coordinator of the Organic Growers Research and Information Sharing Network, or OGRIN, has conducted research in organic cropping systems for over 20 years, primarily through collaborative on-farm trials with growers. Nigel Tudor grows and mills certified organic grains at Weatherbury Farm in southwest Pennsylvania. The farm also raises grass-fed beef and lamb and offers overnight farm vacation stays. Trained in machining and architectural blacksmithing, he finds these skills useful in repairing, modifying, and building farm equipment. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over the screen controls to our first speaker, Frank Kutka. So Frank, if you click on the screen, you should have the control.
Okay, it looks like I do. Well, good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you are, as the case may be. Greetings from sunny North Dakota. I'm going to lead us off here with a outline. There we go. Sorry.
Okay. There you go.
There we go. An outline of our presentation today. So first, we're muted as an overview of the Value-Added Grains project, and so you can see how this work fits into that. We will briefly discuss einkorn, emmer, and spelt as potentially high-value crops and explain why they're interesting. We will look at the basic methods for dehulling these grains because these wheats come with hulls, unlike bread wheat does today. We will move to economic considerations and comparing some of the larger scale manufactured dehullers that are available on the market, and then visit with two farmers and their approaches to getting dehulling accomplished, both in Pennsylvania and North Dakota. And then we'll finish up with looking at some smaller scale dehulling options that are out there in various places around the world, and then of course wrap up with your questions and a discussion. Okay. Our project, oops, looks like I got too far there. Alice? Okay, thank you. This is an Organic Research and Education Initiative project with the overarching goal to increase organic food grade small grain production because small grains are so important in crop rotations. We're looking at them as high value crops, adding value through local and organic production, and adding value through processing both on or off the farm as necessary. And one major project objective is to document and evaluate the approaches to grain dehulling that are available and being used. We have an amazing team all across the country, researchers and plant breeders, economists, and all at several different universities. We've got a marketing group out of New York, farmer organizations all around the country as well. So it's really fun when we have project team meetings. Okay, there we go. The project also has a very large advisory committee, including people from all parts of the food chain, from farming to processing to baking, and serving people very wonderful food. So why are people finding some renewed interest in these ancient grains, einkorn, emmer, and spelt? It just looks like a wheat field, but what's the big driver here? Well, there are several. There we go. One thing farmers have noticed is that some of varieties of these subspecies of wheat are fairly tolerant to stresses in the field. Some are very disease resistant, and some are quite drought tolerant. And that's pretty interesting. I don't know how many of you have done taste testing, but there are actually incredible nuanced flavor differences among varieties of wheat, and some of these ancient varieties are quite flavorful and very popular when we do taste testing. And then nutritional quality and price are also really driving things. The ancient grains as a group frequently are higher in protein and minerals and various antioxidants than most of the bread wheat varieties that we know right now. And some of them seem to have protein profiles that might make them more edible by people who have wheat tolerance problems. Also, currently the retail prices are pretty high, and that of course always gets everyone's attention. And I'm going to switch over to Brian now. Take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Yes, so that is getting a lot of people's attention right now, and as the economist, I get to ask some of the tough questions and see if it's really worthwhile to get into this area and look at some of the short-term bottlenecks and long-term trends that are in front of us right now. And the
unmuted.
Yeah. The next slide, please. How do you, let's see. There we go. So you do have some challenges to be aware of. It's
muted.
Not the same as growing wheat, and one of the main reasons is that these grains do not thresh free of their hulls. So you need to have some way of removing the outer hull to make it available for human consumption. These grains can be fed to ruminants without that step. There are other uses that are possible, but the real value added there is making these products into bread flour and into pasta and other grains that are for human consumption, and that entails additional handling costs. One of the reasons these ancient grains fell out of favor thousands of years ago was that they took extra handling, that they required additional steps, that you're dealing with higher volume per unit. You're looking at having to deal with those added costs. But these are not unique. Other crops have hulls that need to be removed. So this is something that rice and barley and oats deal with, and we can talk a little bit later about modifications to equipment designed for other grains, as well as equipment that's dedicated to dehulling the grains we're talking about today. Some of these, some of the other crops that have hulls also can have their equipment adapted for these grains, such as sunflower and buckwheat. So okay, hitting it again. So should you have if you're growing these grains, if you're growing these grains, should you have a dehuller on the farm? And the answer to that question is that it depends. There are advantages. Obviously, you're not having to pay somebody else to remove the hull. Then you can get a higher price, and the premium fluctuates. How much more one can get has not been stable, depending on regional differences, transportation costs, and other factors. So a lot of these considerations are local or regional in nature. But if the final buyer requires dehulling before delivery, you'd have to find somebody else to remove the hulls if you can't remove them yourself. You have more marketing options. You can sell to a dehulled grain to more different markets than you can if you're selling in the hull. You're kind of limited to just a few markets at the present time. And if you can reduce the bulk, you can have higher value in what you're transporting. So you're looking at lower unit costs for the dehulled grains. Once the dehulled grains, the storage volume is less, and it also gives you more options for your rotation. And one final consideration is the hulls themselves have value, that there will be some protein left as well as a lot of roughage. So dairy farmers will like the hulls. They can be used as animal bedding for poultry, and chickens will pick away at it as well. And people can make them into pillows, just like with buckwheat hull pillows. Or they can also be used for filtering juices, many other uses. So the hulls have value themselves that should be taken into consideration. But you have to be aware of some of the disadvantages as well, that you really need to be able to recover your costs if you have a dehuller, and that requires certain economies of scale. You have to be above a certain level. You have to be able to dehull a certain capacity, and it might require working with neighbors or working with others who will ask to have their grains custom dehulled. But still, that's a consideration, that below a certain threshold, and that's going to be site-specific or location-dependent as well. Below a certain threshold, it's just not going to make sense to have a dehuller, depending on how far you are from the nearest dehuller in other markets. So dehulling also takes time, and time is money, and it's not just the operation of it, but also the setup, the cleaning, and in some cases the installation. Once the hull is removed, then the shelf life or the storage life is decreased. You're looking at more losses, potential for decay. Some of the diseases that are concerned in post-harvest handling, particularly some of the ones that produce fungal toxins, need to be considered. So the timing of dehulling is important as well. You can't just dehull it all at once and store it if you want to keep it for a while. And finally, it takes a certain amount of quality control, and the efficiency of the machines vary. Some are better adept to handle the grains than others. So you have a number of options out there, but basically the hulls are removed by three different actions. One is to just bang it against a wall or a piece of metal or something. Those are called impact dehullers, and that's the force of the grain hitting the surface is what removes the hull. Then there's a friction dehuller, which pulls the hull apart from the grain. And then there's abrasion, which makes which pulls has some kind of a rough surface that causes the hull to open up and be pulled apart from the grain. So one has to look at what the throughput is, or how much one can run through a given dehuller, and the throughput can vary from a few pounds per hour to over a ton. And the right scale, the right size is going to depend on how much you're trying to run through. I'll be talking about some specific manufactured models that are more commercial scale, but we can also talk about modifying some of the dehullers that were built for other grains, and then the next speaker, Nigel, will talk about a custom-built model. We'll talk about a few of those options as well. But a dehuller is just one step in the process. The grain needs to be dried down properly before it can be dehulled, and the efficiency decreases as the grain is more moist. Also, there are greater losses when there's higher moisture. So often, especially in humid areas, it's important to have a dryer that's able to get the grain down to the desired moisture level before dehulling. And then it's also important that the grain be clean, because that also, the more trash there is in the grain, the lower the operating efficiency, the slower the machine can work, the lower the quality. And then these machines wear out just like any machine, and they need to be repaired. One needs to be able to get spare parts, and either have some kind of a service contract, be able to work with the to be able to fix it up. So here's an example of an impact dehuller. This is a model patented by Forsberg. So you have a grain that's fed in to the top, and it spins very fast. That wheel spins very fast and throws it against an impeller ring, and that ring breaks apart the hull, and then it's separated by centrifugal force and gravity, and the heavier grain falls out the bottom, and the hulls are kept in suspension above, just enough to blow them out. Here's a corn sheller that's been modified with a rubber disc or some kind of a rosin that is used as more of a friction dehuller. Was originally designed by Alan Dong and I believe it's Robert Edberg, who were looking at low-cost ways of dehulling rice mainly, but they've also tried it out with other grains, including spelt as well. So that's a lower cost option. But the three models that I'm looking at, the three commercial scale models that seem to be the ones that are predominantly used by commercial operations, are the Kodima, the Hager, and the Horn. And I looked at the ones that are in about the 1 ton rated capacity, 1 ton per hour rated capacity. So these all are in operation in commercial enterprises around the U.S. They're all available, and they, comparing them, they all, stacked up pretty close. But we ran with the following assumptions, that we're looking at a price that is a little low right now in some places. This is about in other places this is still about what the price is, but dehulled, we were assuming based on the average the past couple of years, not the current price. It's about 68 cents a pound out of the hull, and in the hull about 30% with a 60% efficiency in separation by weight. Labor had to be factored in at what the mills are paying these days in the Northeast, and then use the New York State average for electricity costs, and a depreciation of 5-year straight line. 2 of the 3 machines are imported from Europe, and we also factored in what it costs to finance. So looking at the different costs, we're looking at maximum capacity and maximum hour capacity that was between a little over a ton and a ton and a half, and they're priced between 16,000 and 35,000. But the installation costs were also different. That the horn is more of a standalone model that can do some of the pre-cleaning and sorting, and the Kodima has a higher installation cost. The Hager is somewhere in between, but closer to the Kodima in terms of installation. And then maintenance and repair was factored in based on what the manufacturer's service recommendations are, and estimates there. So the variable costs were about with those assumptions, we're looking at between 2 and 2.5 cents a pound for dehulling. So we were looking at breaking even after between 300 and 500 hours of operation, and making back between $45,000 and $60,000 on the investment. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nigel.
Hello, my name is Nigel Tudor, and our family farm is Weatherbury Farm, which is an integrated and sustainable farm located southwest of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We raise grass-fed beef and lamb, organic grains, and we offer farm vacations on our farm. For your information, here's a list of grains that we grow. We farm about 200 acres with 50 acres in grain. As our fields are on slopes, we have 100-foot wide contour strips alternating between hay and crop fields. We started growing organic grains so that we would have straw to bed our cows. The manure from our cows gets composted and is fertilizer for our grains. The cows also eat the hay that we grow in the contour strips between the grain fields. Why did I decide to start growing spelt? I don't know. But when we started growing grains, we grew soft red winter wheat and rye. And around that time, we were talking to several area farmers about grains that we could grow. And when we mentioned spelts, almost all the farmers would say something like, "My granddaddy grew spelts. It yielded real well. I don't know why we stopped growing it." So I kind of felt that spelt was something we had to try. Initially, we didn't understand the difficulty of dehulling it, but it became evident as several years worth of spelt started to accumulate. I visited several dehulling operations and looked at additional dehullers online. The people with the German style dehullers of the style made by the companies Horn and Hager were very happy with them. The alternative type of dehuller, an impact dehuller, was beyond my abilities to make, so I gravitated towards the German design. I built this dehuller as a SARE grant, and plans are available. The hopper on my dehuller, I saw a Hager dehuller and I liked the design of the hopper, so I copied it, but the one problem that they had on the Hager dehuller was they had bridging over the feed gate, and I solved that by putting a gear motor that turns at 17 RPM with an agitator. The way my dehuller works is it has a rotor with two hammers which make the spelt go round and round inside the screen here, and the spelt gets dehulled between a combination of rubbing against the screen, rubbing against other spelt, and getting hit by the hammers. And once it's dehulled, it can fit through the screen. I made 3 different screens for my dehuller. The one on the left is a 1/4 inch space cloth screen that's commercially available. The one in the middle is a larger opening screen that I had made to do spelt, and the one on the right is for smaller spelt or spring emmer. An aspirator is an air column that the grain falls through, and the air velocity carries away the lighter hulls. The fan for my aspirator is mounted behind the main control panel, and the aspirator itself is on the front of the machine connected to the fan with a flexible tube. I'm also a blacksmith and make architectural ironwork, so I have a full complement of metalworking equipment, which came in handy with this project. The total cost to build this dehuller was $12,547. Of that, the steel was $1,090. The wire screens, which I showed you earlier, were $4,579 to have them custom woven, or about $416 per screen. I got 11 screens when I built this dehuller, which would do about 1,000 tons of spelt. The electronics, though, were the big expense at $6,413. It took me 88 hours to do the metal fabrication, an additional 50 hours to wire the dehuller. I worked with a local industrial control electrician I had worked with previously on this project to spec out the control panel sizes and all the components that I needed. We got the materials from 2 local supply houses, but when it came time to actually wire up the dehuller once it was all built, my electrician went AWOL, so I ended up biting the bullet and doing it myself. And I have wired industrial controls before. This is just much more complicated than anything I had done previously. On the right-hand side is a picture of the dynamic brake, and after having built the machine, I think we could have done without the dynamic brake, which would have saved about $1,500. Here's a picture of the dehuller in action. As you can see, we use a manual bucket elevator, as in 5-gallon buckets. And in the lower left-hand part of the picture here, you can see a tube coming off the aspirator fan, and that's going outside to a tote that's positioned there to capture the hulls. We give the hulls to a local dairy farmer who in turn gives us all the manure out of his calf barn. So it's a pretty fair trade. Here's some pictures of dehulled grain. Now the first step is when we bring the spelt out of the field in a gravity box, we run it through our Clipper 27 cleaner. We use a 1/2 inch round scalp screen which will take out pieces of straw and unthreshed heads. And we use a 1464 sieve screen which will take out the combine dehulled spelt. So in the left-hand picture, that's what the spelt looks like coming out of the cleaner. In the center picture, that's once through the dehuller, we have a 88.5% dehulling rate, a 73% extraction rate on the 2414 crop, and we're running about 300 pounds an hour. I wanted to try a little experiment though, because we separate using a gravity separator, and not everybody's going to have that equipment. So I ran a couple pounds through the dehuller again. So the picture on the right is running through the dehuller twice, and you can see we achieved a 98% dehulling rate. There was a little bit of crackage, so maybe I should have slowed the rotor down a little. But if you didn't have a gravity separator, but you wanted to mill spelt flour, and you had a sieve with your mill, you could use a coarse sieve to do whole spelt flour, and a fine sieve to do unbleached spelt flour. The picture on the left is some spelt berries coming off my gravity separator, and the picture on the right is some black winter emmer that I dehulled to plant some plots that I'm bulking. And here's my view of the economics of dehulling. My local dehulling mill, which is a little over 100 miles away, is currently paying 30 cents a pound for spelt in the hull. If you figure it out at a 63% extraction rate, that means they're paying 47 cents per pound for the actual spelt. The mill is currently selling the dehulled spelt to larger buyers for 90 cents a pound. This is a 43 cents per pound difference between hulled and dehulled spelt. Now, I should mention that's the widest difference that there has been historically. My machine at 300 pounds per hour, that means I'm capturing $128 of value per hour. Now, as you saw, my machine's very labor intensive, so it takes 2 people to dehull, my father and myself. So basically, we're capturing about $64 an hour of value. If you figure the payback on my machine, we would have it paid off roughly at current prices in 98 hours of operation, or about 16 acres worth of spelt. Now, for us on our farm here, because we're farming slopes, we can't farm a large area. So for us, it's very important to add value to our products. So that's what I wanted to show with this slide. And the past 2 years, I've gotten 100 bushel spelt, which is about 2,800 pounds to the acre. And if you were to sell that as raw spelt, you would get $840 per acre. If you were to dehull the spelt and be able to sell the spelt berries, you would get $1,456 per acre. And if you had a flour mill and you could sell it as whole grain spelt flour, I sell my whole grain spelt flour for $1.30 a pound. That means you would make $2,366 per acre. Now, to temper your enthusiasm, I should mention I have yet to sell a whole acre's worth of spelt as flour. But I do sell a lot of spelt wholesale to a local grocer and a person who has a flour mill also in my region. Now, if you are a smaller farm and you're looking at dehulling, you should keep in mind that the larger buyers would like to buy truckloads and probably don't want to consider anything smaller than 10 tons. So if you have less than 10 tons, you need to try and find a local market for your spelt. And it's worth more that way anyways, too. And these are 2 other crops that I'm growing. Oh, let's go back here. In plot scale that I hope to have a field scale of, I'll be able to use my dehuller for them. And so I'm finished, and I'll hand it back to Frank.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And that was quite exciting. I have the honor of representing Blaine Schmalz today and his experiences with dehulling emmer. Blaine is one of the founding members of the Farm Breeding Club, and he is a farmer and a seedsman in Rugby, North Dakota. He has been working throughout this revival of emmer for the last 10 years. And, emmer's relatively easy to grow. It is a bit prone to lodging if there's too much water or fertility, really heavy winds. But really the biggest problem for it, because it's also quite dependable in most of his crop rotations in North Dakota, is getting through the dehulling step, getting to that sellable product on the right. Blaine has worked with several different mill operators over the last few years, trying to find just the right formula for getting dehulling to work, and it's been a struggle. His current partners are Identity Preserved Ingredients, who have a couple of grain cleaning mills in Hillsboro, North Dakota. The IPI folks do a lot of barley purling. Here are a couple of their barley purling mills in one of their setups on the west side of town. You can see those are gigantic machines with 100-horse electric motors. They also use aspiration in cleaning out the hulls, and here's their aspirator. So just to compare scale here, barley purling is a pretty big scale thing. Blaine was really hoping that barley purling equipment would work well for emmer, and it's already built in, so why not give that a try? Here's the purled barley. It comes through pretty well. It's economical. The whole setup is right there. Here is the aspirated fines, includes all of the hulls and the rest. Works great. Does it work for emmer? Well, unfortunately, not so well. It has been very, very hard to find a way to dehull emmer in a feasible manner to meet the kind of sales that Blaine and the others interested in emmer out here on the plains think they can do. To start with, Blaine is seeing 7 to 10% loss from just cleaning the grain out of the combine right there on the farm. When he goes to the purling and impact type machines, there's just much too much damage to the product, and he has seen up to 40% loss from the product stream while running through the mills. Thus far, the price to farmers has not been high enough to cover these kind of losses, and it has been very impractical for processors to do all of the cleaning and re-cleaning that's required to handle emmer with losses that are this large, especially for a market which is at this point so much smaller than is dehulling barley. So here's what Blaine especially wanted me to pass on to everyone, because he has found some ways that really improve dehulling, and he has a new machine that he wants us to see. Number one, he strongly suggests that cleaning happen as soon as you get off the combine. So get the material scalped, get it aspirated if possible, get rid of all the large things, the unthreshed heads, take out all of the awns, the grasshoppers, and whatever else might be there. Makes it much nicer to store in the bin as well. Blaine frequently will use a gravity table or a destoner, which is basically a slightly smaller sized gravity table. Uses the same sort of approach. This is a very important step when you can include it for getting the grain cleaned. And here's some that went over a gravity table, and you can see it still needs more cleaning. So that's not quite enough, but it certainly has removed a lot of things that might have been in there. Certainly got rid of the rocks, also gets rid of some of the largely empty spikelets that certainly do show up. They also use air screen mills. This is a 7-deck machine that they have at the IPI facility, and they are planning to use on cleaning emmer. Air screens at the farm are certainly very useful as well. Material either, it falls through screens or doesn't fall through screens, so it separates by size and also blows an airflow through to help remove fines. And if you see what just comes off the combine and runs through a single deck, you can see we've eliminated a lot of large things, but there's still a lot of small stuff. We still need to separate the some of the kernels and the kernels still in hulls. So there's several cleaning steps really to get to a good product. In Blaine's mind, what you'd like to see to have it ready for dehulling is to have seed quality emmer. So he cleans it up to seed quality before he takes it to dehuller. So all that's running through that dehulling machine is good high quality emmer. Here's Blaine opening up his new mill. It is a custom-built mill that is being installed at the IPI facility. I apologize, this next photo is a little bit dark, but this is basically the machine there. There are rough impeller paddles that rub the material against a series of screens. It falls down through a very large aspiration airflow and then down into a elevator where it then goes on to either destoning mills or the 7-deck air cleaner. Another critical piece of this machine is a 30-horse variable speed motor. Varying the speed is very important to match what you need to do to get the hulls off depending on the moisture content of the grain. Beat it as hard as it needs without going too hard, in which case you start to break the grain or pearl the grain, which isn't really what you're looking to do. After running through this machine, material looks like this. So that's obviously not quite ready. So once through, and that's what they're really hoping for with this machine, is a fairly high flow rate, and once through dehulling, you have to go back and re-clean it. So it goes from there to some of the other cleaners. This one here suggests the Royal Mounted Police are making a problem here. That's a typo I made. At high RPM, you can really damage the grain. So this is all pearled and starting to break. So varying the speed is critical. Anyway, we have to re-clean the material. And then we get to a lovely final product that can be shipped. It's no longer bulky. It's readily saleable. So there's still pre-cleaning, dehulling, and recleaning, but Blaine is hoping with his partners to have a machine that will allow them to rapidly and easily dehull and speed the whole thing up and do it much more efficiently without losing quite so much product. Emmer hulls and some of the other material coming off look like a valuable byproduct. Blaine says that some of the samples come out with fairly high crude proteins, and they are looking, once this market grows a bit and they have much of this material, they'll be looking for ways to sell this to farmers raising cattle especially. Okay, so what has Blaine learned in his 10 years? Emmer is a great crop for organic management. It's especially wonderful in places where the rain is less than 20 inches a year, which fits his situation quite well. It is prone to lodging. It's bulky. There is limited large-scale processing capacity. It is, however, because of its bulk, very easy to dry in the bin. To clean the seed effectively for dehulling, really need to look at what it takes to produce high-quality seed: scalpers, gravity tables, air, and screens. Dehulling needs good equipment with plenty of aspiration, as well as recleaning steps to keep the machines clean so they run efficiently, and then also to get the product ready for sale. The price needs to be high enough to cover production and this extra cleaning expenses, and we'll certainly be seeing much more about how that all works out here. And lastly, Blaine felt that it's very important to look for ways to value some of the byproducts. That might be an extra way to expand the value of this as it goes through. And I hand off to Elizabeth.
Yes, I would like to talk a little bit about some smaller scale dehulling options we've been ferreting out. And I'd like to start out with the inspiration I got from a trip to France in 2011 when I was lucky enough to visit some French organic farms and saw that all of these farms were doing a lot of processing of grains on the farm. So they were milling their own grain, they were baking with it, and they were making pasta with these wonderful products here. But very importantly, they all seem to have a small-scale dehuller on hand. And with that, of course, they were able to do the first step of processing their emmer and einkorn crops. So when I brought back this information to some Northeast growers that I work with, they were all very enthusiastic. But we soon found that a major roadblock was that there was very little availability of this scale-appropriate equipment. However, in the last couple of years, I think we're starting to make some progress. So I don't know whether it's going to advance or not, Alice. There we go. So one of the options that farmers were, interested in was sharing equipment to try to share the cost. And this might make sense with dehulling because dehulling is not a time-critical process as harvesting is, or cleaning grain, drying grain, for example. So NOFA New York, which is a partner on the project under the leadership of Robert Perry, have put together a mobile dehulling unit consisting of a Forsberg 7D impact dehuller, a small-scale dehuller, and a Oliver 30 gravity table. Now we decided to include the gravity table because what comes out of the dehuller is a mix of dehulled kernels, undehulled kernels, split kernels, and other mess. And so we're hoping that the gravity table will be able to separate this out so that by the end of the process, farmers will have at least two potentially saleable products, i.e. whole berries and also material that can be used to make flour. So the unit has now been mobilized thanks to Cornell, largely due to the efforts of John Conklin. And here you see Robert Perry. He's going to be heading out in the next couple of months to visit several farms and farming communities where they're going to be evaluating this unit and see if it's a viable option for folks. I often am asked, or people will ask, whether you can dehull with a combine. And when you talk to growers, some growers report, for example, Kit and Kathy Kelly of Washingtonville, PA, here with their ACL crop, that sometimes there's a pretty good percentage of dehulled kernels coming through the combine. But this varies from crop to crop, from variety to variety, and from year to year. So the bottom line these growers report is that you really need you can't rely on a combine, you really need a standalone dehuller. One really viable option, I think, is modifying equipment to dehull. And an elegant example comes from Henry Byler in Watsontown, PA, who modified a used International Harvester burr mill with rubber discs made from horse mat for a really remarkably low cost. And he's been hulling spelt for several years with this machine, has yet to replace his rubber discs, and he gets quite a high quality product. The one major drawback he thinks this system has is that it's relatively time consuming. For example, it takes him about an hour to dehull 100 to 120 pounds of spelt. Another option, that I ran across quite unexpectedly, but it's quite exciting to me, is that there are apparently some small-scale dehullers that are being manufactured on farm. Here is an example. This one is manufactured by the Stutzman family in Ohio, and it uses an abrasion technique. Here you can see a metal plate with ridges that, rather than teeth, that's used to dehull the grain. And notice that it's quite low cost. They're selling at $400 without a motor. Apparently this works very well with spelt. When I saw it demonstrated, they were trying spring emmer for the first time, which seemed to take a couple more throughput operations. But nevertheless, this looks like a very viable low-cost method. The project has also been working on an experimental prototype. This is a brainstorm of Julie Dawson, who worked with the project until she moved to the University of Wisconsin, and her father, Paul Dawson, who's a professor at Cornell. And the two of them helped grad students to put together a project to design and build a low-cost method of dehulling emmer. And this is what the students came up with. It actually uses two dehulling mechanisms, an impact dehuller and a friction dehuller, and it does a really good job. Here you can see the unhulled kernels. This is one throughput in the machine, and then the second one, which is getting to a pretty high efficiency rate there. So this looks like it will work with both emmer and spelt. It does have some drawbacks. David Bencher, the person at Cornell who's been working with this most closely, notes that a major drawback is that it requires high energy. The friction dehuller is powered by a 7.5 horsepower motor, which requires almost 20 starting amps. Nevertheless, this looks like it has some promise. It may go through some more design iterations. If you're interested in this type of dehuller, Cornell is going to be releasing a public report. Just get in touch with me and I'll get you in touch with them. Finally, I want to talk about, just using existing equipment without modifying it. And it turns out that there are a number of different machines you can use to dehull. Calvin Ernst of Ernst Seeds recently demonstrated for us at a field day that you can use a debearder, which is usually used to take off awns or hair from seed or to break up heads that came through the combine intact. It can actually do a really decent job on spelt and emmer. George Wright, an innovative grain grower in Ontario, has reported that he uses a seed scarifier to dehull, and it works for him. Actually, there are a whole bunch of things that you can use to dehull. You can use a stone mill, for example, like this Sprout Waldron model here. And I use a blender when I'm working with 1 to 2 pound samples when I'm trying to get them ready for grain quality analysis. Now, a caveat, when you're using things like this stone mill or a blender, your efficiency rate will be quite low, and you're going to come up with a lot of split kernels and smush kernels. And the bottom line, too, is whenever you're working with any of these small-scale dehulling options, you're still going to need to combine them with some kind of a separation method to get to a saleable product. So with that, I'd like to summarize what we've been talking about so far. Ancient grains are potentially very high-value crops, but the dehulling factor and its associated costs should be considered as you decide whether to grow these grains. Dehulling is a process. Seed cleaning and separation equipment are needed in addition to a dehuller, whatever the scale you're operating on. Dehullers vary in method, throughput, efficiency, power requirements, and cost, as demonstrated by Brian. Dehullers may also vary in effectiveness by crop. That is, do not assume that a model is a universal dehuller, even if it's advertised as one. For smaller scale operations, modifying existing seed cleaning or milling equipment or building your own may be very good options. And finally, markets for dehulling byproducts and for harvests that do not meet human consumption standards need to be identified to increase profitability and reduce the risk in growing these crops. We'd like to thank these people in particular for helping us with this presentation, and notice June Russell from Green Market Grow New York City, who provided a lot of the pictures you've been looking at. For more information on ancient grains, our project has produced 2 other webinars, and you can find them at these links. So with this I'll hand it back over to Alice.
The webinar is being recorded, so if you want to share it with others or listen to it again, you can find it on our website at extension.org, and the link for it is right there. With that, I will move on to the questions. Let's see. One traditional method of dehulling these grains is by parching using dry heat. Have any of you studied this method? Everyone can unmute their mic and chip in here.
I have not, but it sounds like an interesting method. Anyone else have any comments?
Yeah, this is Frank. I have not either, but several of us out here who have accidentally spilled emmer onto some hot equipment have seen them pop open and the hulls become very loose. How that might fit into the product stream, I couldn't possibly guess, but it does seem like it could help, especially if you're going for a toasted product at the end of the day.
Okay, what are the public health and inspection requirements for dehulling? Is it considered processing by most health departments?
Yeah, I believe that it falls under, it would be considered a grain processing, so you would need to follow the state and federal rules on requirements for grain processing facilities.
Okay. It seems that dehulling einkorn is similar to dehulling small spelt or emmer. Is that your experience? Do you have examples of anyone dehulling einkorn?
I know that a couple of us can speak to this question. I do know that our experience in the Northeast here, we're still getting up to commercial levels of einkorn production. So we have probably the least experience with dehulling einkorn. That being said, everything we've heard so far from other growers in other countries and in other regions in the United States suggests that einkorn is probably most difficult to dehull in terms of preserving an intact seed. It's very delicate. So we're going to be working, we'll soon be experimenting quite heavily with einkorn dehulling. But I know that one of the laboratory models we've been using quite successfully with spelt and emmer, actually, if we're not careful, will actually pearl the einkorn, which is not what we want.
Yeah, this is Frank Kutke here. Similarly, here in the northern plains, einkorn production is really very small scale compared to emmer. And so far, attempts at dehulling einkorn with whatever gear we've had have been much more difficult than emmer. Although there's one observation from Steve Zwinger, one of our project partners, I want to pass along, which is this. Although he could take a sample and struggle to get it to dehull through his Forsberg dehuller, he can take those same heads and with his fingernails pinch the base of the spikelets and gets the seeds to pop straight out. If anyone can figure out a machine to do that, we're ready to roll.
Okay, here's a question.
I think,
oh, sorry.
Nigel, do you want to comment a little bit on the possibility of doing einkorn on your machine? What that might take? He may be muted. Go ahead, Alice. We can always return to that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we hear you, Nigel.
Okay. Yeah, you can do einkorn on my machine, but the screen that I have, it will debeard it, but it doesn't dehull it. I need a tighter screen. But Claus Martins dehulls einkorn on a horn machine, so I know if I get the screen right, it'll work.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Another question about einkorn. This grower has one cultivar of hulless einkorn. Is there any breeding work being done that you know of to develop hulless or looser hulled varieties?
Well, I'll speak to this one. This is Frank Kutka with NPSAS. We recognize there are some that dehull easily or nearly hullless, and we are actually this winter starting some crosses to cross our higher yielding einkorns with the hulless types to see what might come of it. If anyone else is working on this in Italy or elsewhere, I would love to hear about it.
Okay. Do you know if this equipment can be used to dehull buckwheat, barley, oats, and someone else asked about millet?
Yeah, we should have spoken to this. Brian mentioned this earlier, that a lot of the, for example, the Forsberg 7D and 15D dehullers actually were manufactured to dehull things like oats. So many of these, the Kodima as well, although the manufacturer asserts, and I think correctly, that they can be used for spelt and emmer. But yeah, there are these, many of these machines will do a variety of different crops, but as I said, you will have different efficiencies depending on the crop. And buckwheat remains a real tough nut. I've heard from people like Klaus Martins, for example, and from other folks about a variety of different crops, that it's always good to try to size your crop before you attempt to dehull it, and that seems to be particularly important for buckwheat.
Okay, here's a question of have you tried farro? And so maybe you could just talk about which of these grains is farro, because since I know that's sometimes a cause of confusion.
Yeah, this can be a real headache because farro, which is an Italian term, can refer to emmer, it can refer to spelt, it can refer to einkorn. So it's kind of a generic term. About 5 years ago, most people that were importing farro into the United States assumed, and probably rightly so, that it was emmer. But really, it's kind of a confusing term. So in our project and in terms of marketing, etc., we've just suggested that people differentiate between these different species. So we prefer to use the term emmer when we're talking about emmer, spelt, and einkorn.
Okay. Let's see. From a weight standpoint, how much loss is there from the point of cleaned pre-dehulling to post-dehulling? I'm not sure which grain is being talked about, but let's see. Einkorn. Here we go. Thanks.
Again, with einkorn, we have very little information. This is the kind, and there's not a lot of information out there. In fact, until a couple of years ago, all of us were without dehulling capacity who were doing research on this, and so we're just beginning to look at that very question: how much grain, how much of the weight of the initial harvest weight is lost by the time you reach the final product. Does anyone else want to speak to that? I think we're just beginning to develop some numbers on that, which we should be sharing with folks maybe as early as next year.
Yeah, this is Frank Kutka here. I don't know, exactly how much loss is normal or how much the hull weight is normally. As I said, Blaine Schmalz has seen up to 40% loss running through mills, which so far hasn't been working, and that's largely because of damaging the kernels as well as getting the hulls off, or having to throw out spikelets that still have grain in them, but you couldn't get the hulls off. I think Steve Zwinger's work has seen, in North Dakota anyway, emmer frequently having a test weight of about 38 pounds to the bushel. And since wheat normally goes somewhat higher, there's a lot of bulk there, but it doesn't weigh much.
Okay, here's someone who thinks that it's better to leave the hull on the seed because it acts as a fungicide for root rot and stops grain bugs in the bin. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think most people that have been working with these grains for a while, whether they're working at a small or larger scale, they will store the grain in the hull until right before they're about to market it or further process it for that very reason.
Yes, and people who are planting this prefer to plant it in the hull, certainly. No damage to the seed, and the hull does seem to offer some benefits to the planted seeds in getting them off to a quick start.
Although there is some controversy about this point in the farming community, at least in the Northeast, because especially with spelt and even emmer, especially if the awns aren't completely knocked off in the harvesting process, you can have real trouble getting these hulled seeds through the drill. So one of our major spelt and emmer producers here in the East, he dehulls before he plants. But Frank is right. I, for example, advocate that you plant in the hull if at all possible for the reasons that he stated.
Yeah, someone commented that she's found that the germination rate on hulled grains is very good from her testing. So there's a question about whether or not you looked in Italy at the small-scale methods used by Italians for dehulling emmer or furrow.
Actually, that first dehuller I showed you in the picture on the French slide is a machine that came from Italy, and I have yet to be able to track it down. So we would love, if the person who asked that question has some information, please share it with us, because we need to ferret out as many possibilities as we possibly can, and I don't think we've nearly hit all those possibilities.
Okay, so here again is a comment about planting the grain with the hull, and she said planting it as a bugger, so we spread it and then harrow over it.
That's a very good idea. You know, we're just starting to work with winter black emmer here. Nigel mentioned it, and some growers that I've been working with are starting to grow it, and that's a particularly huge hull. And so this fall, 2 farmers tried to plant it in the drill, and even at it wide open, they couldn't get nearly the planting rate that they needed. So certainly broadcasting and harrowing in it may be a very good option.
In handling smaller samples of especially einkorn and replanting from year to year throughout the research process, Steve Zwinger at the Carrington Station in North Dakota frequently puts his material through a de-awner because some of the awns really don't like to come off. So he plants seed in the hull, but he has run it through a machine to get the awns off because they'll bridge terribly.
Okay, here's a question about what the feasibility of milling these grains with the hull on and then sifting would be.
Certainly, one of the challenges here is separating, once you've run material through a dehuller, is getting excellent separation between the material that has been hulled and has been dehulled. If you get it down to the point where you have a minor contamination of hulled grain, I think you could certainly try that, putting it then through the mill and then sifting out the ground up hulls. Maybe Nigel can comment, because he is also a miller.
Hi, this is Nigel. I can say that if you have more than probably about 5% of hulls remaining, they really stick into your sieves. But if you have less than that, you can get away with it. It works. But you couldn't take raw spelt and mill it and sift it out. It's just too much hulls to deal with in the sieves of the mill.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from someone who kind of couldn't attend at the last minute, but he sent in 2 questions, and I know he'll be listening to the recording. He wants to know if anyone has any experience in buying and using any Chinese-made equipment. He said it looks okay online, but what should maybe he know before buying? And then he also wanted to know whether there are any textbooks, preferably older ones, on dehulling. So those are 2 separate questions.
Wow, I don't believe any of us have experience with the Chinese machines at this point. It would be interesting. Certainly the Japanese rice hulling and barley hulling machines have been tried, and those haven't worked out. I don't know what other kind of equipment they have in China. It'd be interesting to see it. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've just had experience testing out a Japanese-made rice dehuller, which was relatively small scale, and it worked very well for a while, but was soon overwhelmed because the farmer needed a lot more throughput than it could deliver. What was the second question, Alice?
About
the textbook.
Textbooks, yeah, any older textbooks that anybody could recommend on dehulling.
I'd sure be anxious for anyone in the audience to recommend anything. I've been looking for that for years. I don't know, Brian, have you wandered across that? I know you've done some extensive background research.
Let's see, we don't hear you, Brian, if you're on.
He may be muted here. Yeah, okay. He's muted.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, let me unmute him here. Okay, Brian, you're unmuted. Are you
yes,
there?
hello,
okay,
yes, I've been typing. I'm muted for about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So anyway,
right.
yeah. On the Chinese question, I've looked into that some, and what I found is that importation, there is an issue. There are a couple of issues. One has to do with OSHA requirements and safety, and some of them would have to be upgraded to meet some of the safety requirements. A few other issues as well in terms of you know, how to get parts. As far as textbooks go, I haven't looked at old textbooks, but I've been scouring the patent literature, and you know, in addition to the old Forsberg, I've been looking at some of the 100-year-old patents that are out there, some of the different designs for smaller scale operation and operation without necessarily being reliant on electricity. But those, yeah, how commercially viable they are, I couldn't say, and they would of course require some kind of assembly that they would have to be custom built.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Has anyone used the new Bueller Impact Dehuller?
No.
Okay.
We'll be very interested in hearing more from the person who mentioned that.
Well, she said it's expensive, but the volume capacity is high. So.
Well, I'm noting that down. We'll take.
Yeah,
we'll
it's
take a look.
spelled Buhler. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that a German model?
Don't know.
We don't know.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, she said she'll send a link, so that's great. We'll
Great.
do that in a minute.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I'll share that with everyone. Okay, a question about whether or not anybody has experience in dehulling millet, also known as proso millet or white millet or French white millet.
I have not, but there is a Forsberg 2 model that apparently works well with crops like millet. That Forsberg 2 also, for some bizarre reason, also works quite well with spelt, for anyone that has a chance to find that model.
Okay, let's see. Is there any contamination we should avoid, like any materials that they should avoid, like nylon, paint, or synthetic rubber when making a dehuller?
Nigel, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I'm not sure about nylon paint, but you have to keep in mind that the spout holes have high silica content, so they are very abrasive, and everything on the inside of the dehuller should be replaceable. And probably you would want to stay away from synthetic plastics and stuff like that, just because you don't want to eat them.
Okay. Let's see. Are there design and instruction manuals for the small-scale homemade dehullers you showed during the presentation? And if so, where might people find them?
That's a good question. Yeah, if you email me, I can put you in touch with or give you the materials that I have. For example, the experimental prototype from Cornell, that is going to be available. They just didn't have a link for me to give to you in time for this presentation, but if you email me, I will get you that information.
Okay, you want to...
And Nigel very nicely provided a schematic, a patent schematic for the a forerunner of that small little green dehuller. So yeah, if you get in touch, I'll try my best to get you whatever design materials I can find.
Okay, can you share your contact information there for anybody who's interested?
Yeah, it's edyck@ogren.org.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone, okay, here's a kind of a different question, but it's interesting. Has anyone experienced desapinifying quinoa? I wonder if impact or friction style dehullers might work.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know what they're talking about, but I'm not immediately seeing the application.
If you look on YouTube, the people who have commodity traders, their channel is Redheads31, I think. They have a video of running quinoa through a debearder, and I think that's what they're doing.
Okay, someone just sent a link for the Buehler dehuller, so I just put that into the chat box. I'll put Elizabeth's contact information in the chat box in just a moment also. Apparently there's one of these Buehler dehullers on display at their showroom in Minneapolis. And while I'm looking for that, does anyone have plans for making your own gravity table?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, the gravity table is, getting your hands on a working gravity table is a bit of a conundrum. And that's where we think this equipment sharing idea may really come to play, because Robert Perry was brilliant when he found, after much work, a used gravity table for $6,000 including shipping. And we were lucky it did indeed work quite well. So that's a conundrum of gravity tables can be quite expensive. Any thoughts, Nigel?
Well, you can, if you look around, you can find them cheaper. I paid $1,200 for my gravity table, but the one thing you have to be careful on with a gravity table is the deck. There's going to be coarse grain decks, small grain decks, and grass seed and clover decks. And if you want to clean a coarse grain and a small grain, you're going to need to have two decks. And on some older machines, it can be troublesome to locate two decks that fit your machine.
Okay, great. It's your last chance to ask some questions. I think I asked all the ones that had come in already. While we're waiting for any final questions, I just wanted to thank all of our presenters for this wonderful presentation today and for all the great farm examples that we've seen. And I wanted to remind everyone that you can find all of our other upcoming and archived webinars at the top link on your screen, and you can find the recording and a worksheet. Maybe, Brian, you want to speak about that worksheet and what's on it at that link. And then also, if you want to use the eExtension Ask an Expert service for other organic farming questions, you're welcome to use that. So, Brian, do you want to just mention what that worksheet is that you've uploaded to the page? And I'll make sure that the link all works properly right after the webinar in case anyone had trouble.
Sure. The worksheet is just a simple step-by-step process of figuring out, well, is it really worth your while to go out and buy a dehuller and make some comparisons to looking at some of the parameters, and just figuring out if you've got a dehuller, will you be able to pay it back under the current marketing conditions, or does it make more sense given the volume you have and your location, whether it makes more sense to have somebody do the toll processing, do custom dehulling for you. And then if it does look like it makes more sense for you to buy a dehuller, what dehuller is going to fit your needs and be within your budget. And then looking at the different dehullers, just costing it out to see what the payback is going to be. If it looks like it's going to be profitable to invest in a dehuller, then you can comparison shop and see which one is going to be the best buy given your location. Some of these machines are sold FOB, and you need to figure out what the onboard cost is going to be for getting it shipped to you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here. One person did comment that she brought a small dehuller from China for about $2,000 or so, and she said it works great. So that would be interesting to hear more about that, what kind it is. Let's see, someone wanted to know whether or not you see a big future for these ancient grains.
Well, in the context of our project, which is really focusing on the strong consumer demand for locally grown grains, I think there is a future. You're always worried about, a fad developing. So, for example, with golden flax, when I was working in Minnesota, on 1 minute people were getting lots of money for it, and then when everyone started producing it, the price fell drastically. I think the difference with the situation now is that if you can find local and regional markets that are going to keep wanting your grain, not grain that comes 3,000 miles away or 8,000 miles away. I think these grains are valuable. There's a reason that they survive for thousands of years in little hidden pockets. As Frank said, they're going to, I think, be very valuable as our climate becomes more difficult. And they do have wonderful nutritional attributes and great taste. So I think there is a future. You just have to be very careful and make sure that you look at the extra costs associated with growing these grains. We didn't touch on yield during the presentation, but there can be a yield drag on some of these grains in comparison to modern wheat. So you have to factor that in as well.
Okay.
If I could jump in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Alice? Here in the Dakotas, there's a lot of enthusiasm about the ancient grains. Emmer had a great heyday in the early 1900s. It's got a lot of interest right now. It grows well. It's not hard to grow. And so I guess from the production side, these really do seem like serious opportunities because they're fairly well adapted to growing here on the plains. And if you've ever tasted some of these, yes, you might seriously never want to go back.
I agree.
Does anyone have experience with growing camelina with these types of ancient wheat, harvesting at the same time by combine and then separating the two with seed cleaning equipment? And if so, what screen sizes are used and whether this affects the yield per acre?
I haven't heard of anyone doing that yet out this way. There's so much management to study with these. It's pretty wide open. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I've just spoke with someone who is growing camelina in a rotation, but not. They're talking about this as an intercrop. Is that the gist of the question, Alice? Because a very old practice, and it looks like there's some farmers starting to use this again, is intercropping flax with wheat or oats, or could be potentially with some of these ancient grains. But we have to get more information on that.
Oh, there's actually a farmer who has grown camelina, but did not have a lot of success intercropping it with emmer. So thanks for that comment. Let's see. This is, I think, the last question here. It says, I'm not sure if you're open to facilitating networking, but this person is looking for farmers or processors in the Northwest who would be interested in developing a facility for dehulling. Do you have any recommendation?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes, part of the project is to look at the feasibility of forming farmer cooperatives. And we are definitely interested in finding farmers and others who are interested in forming such a network. There are certain things to be said about the economies of scale and farmers pooling their resources to have equipment that they own jointly through a cooperative. So we'll be following up and surveying farmers to see what kind of interest there is, and we'd like to get the participants of this webinar to respond to a survey that we plan to send out in January or February.
All right, well, we're pretty much out of time now, so I'd like to thank everyone for their great questions. And yeah, I've pretty much gone over all the resources that we have available. So thank you, Brian, Elizabeth, Nigel, and Frank for presenting the results of your research, and we'll look forward to future webinars on this subject.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you too.